Welcome to Conversations. My name is Jason Plotkin. I am the Program Director at Congregation Emanu, and every week we sit down with a member of the congregation, the community, or perhaps even from the sports world to discuss the current state of affairs. This week, Emanu has hosted a series of happenings surrounding homelessness in conjunction with World Homeless Day this coming Saturday. As part of this week of activities, we're delighted to welcome one of our own to the table to continue the conversation about homelessness, none other than our congregant Marc Eichenbaum, who serves as the Special Assistant to the Mayor for Homeless Initiatives. Welcome to Conversations, Marc. How are you today?
I'm doing great. I'm here to speak about sports, right?
Of course, you're here to talk sports. We're happy to talk sports. We're recording this on Monday. The Astros kick off, so I'm wearing my Astros shirt. But Marc, let's talk. Let's learn a little bit about you. And I think the best way to start is talking about your current role, the Special Assistant to the Mayor for Homeless Initiatives. If you had to explain your role and responsibilities from 30,000 feet up, what would you share?
Yeah, so I've been in this current role and one like it for over 7 years now. And I've had the honor of working under two different administrations. What I help do is I lead city policy as it concerns regarding reducing homelessness, helping create those policies and recommendations for the mayor, as well as setting the priorities and the policies for all of our 17 different departments around the issue of homelessness. I think Mayor Turner, really wants to make sure departments do not work in silos. And so the best way that we can prevent that from happening is having a point person who is coordinating all of them together, and then working with our federal partners and our state partners and the 100 different agencies out in the local area that work on homelessness, helping to coordinate them, helping to lead them, and making sure that we're investing our dollars and our efforts into the best practices that are going to help the most number of individuals in the long run.
So now that we kind of have an understanding of your role, how did you end up in this position and with this interest with the mayor's office?
Well, it started under Mayor Parker, where I worked on government affairs and communications. And, it was first Mayor Parker who said, I want to make homelessness a priority of mine. And, we want to see what are other cities doing. And at the time, my sister just finished working for the mayor of Denver, became the governor of Colorado, who is now running for Senate of Colorado. That's Governor John Hickenlooper. And at the time, Denver was the poster child for reducing and solving homelessness in the nation. So I took a delegation from the city and we went to Denver. We really researched what was going on. We met with all the community leaders to really drill down and figure out the secret to their sauce in reducing homelessness. Came back and told the mayor, you have to have one person whose sole job is to work on homelessness 24/7. And in fact, I helped hire, that individual, a national expert by the name of Mandy Chapman Simple. And just a few months into the job, Mandy said, Mayor Parker, I need help. And Mayor Parker said, well, Marc knows more about homelessness than anybody else in the city, which I'll tell you was not much at the time. And that's how I started working on that. And since then, I've got to go all over the world, working with cities, working with our counterparts at the state and federal level, and really, trying to do collective impact systems approach so that we can get the biggest bang for our buck and we can have the biggest impact.
So we've had the fortune at Emanu to have you speak in an event or two, and I've seen you speak in the community. And one of the things you've talked about is the difference between managing homelessness and solving homelessness. Can you explain that difference to our viewers?
Yeah, so, I think the issue around homelessness, you can see in all social issues. We work a lot towards it and we think we're helping. But the question are we spinning our wheels just managing it? Or are we taking our, finite amount of resources and energy, and are we investing it in the areas where we are trying to move the needle and reduce it? So managing homelessness. So often when I ask individuals, what does helping the homeless mean to you? They will say, number one, food. Yes, we'll go get food and we'll drop food off to them. But that is actually managing the symptoms of being homeless. I am homeless, therefore I am hungry. I am homeless, therefore I need clothing. And so often that's what the community's response is. I am homeless, therefore let's put you in an emergency shelter, which is temporary. It's supposed to be for a couple nights, maybe a couple weeks. And so in the past, we were spending tens of millions of dollars on helping the homeless to just managing the symptoms. Then we transition to let's actually work on solving it. And let's work on responding to the causes of homelessness. And so when we see an individual who is literally homeless, solving homelessness can be as simple as this. They are homeless, therefore they are without a home. If you put them in a home, they are no longer homeless. And so now we really try to concentrate all of our efforts and ask that single question. Is this going to help get individuals off the streets for good? Or is this just managing the issues and the problems created by homeless? Because while we're feeding people and while we're clothing people, they still are on the streets. While we're feeding people and we're clothing people and they're on the streets, new people are facing housing instability and falling on the streets. And if you don't work on getting people off and having an exit out of homelessness, your numbers will just grow, grow, grow. That's why LA has over 45,000 homeless individuals. That's why New York has over 80,000 homeless individuals. It's because your attention really has to be focused on those permanent solutions for reducing homelessness.
And one of the things you mentioned earlier is that you work with local and state partners. This is airing the day after we've had Tal Costas, the CEO and president of Search. Obviously, for those watching, Search has immense Emanu connections dating to its founding, which we're really proud about. And there's other great organizations in the community as well. How do all these organizations come together to work to solve homelessness?
Well, first, Search is an amazing organization. And, Emmanuel has a close connection with Search. In fact, the founder, Shelley Cypress, member of Emmanuel, and there's still leadership today that are members of Emmanuel. And Search is one of our systems top partners. When we talk about homelessness, I hear people too often use that whole story of the child saving starfish from the sea. And, the parent says, why are you saving one starfish when there's thousands still that are beached that are going to die? And the child says, well, if I can just make a difference in, one of their lives, that's all that matters. I hate that story. And the reason being is that the homeless are not starfish. They are human beings. And just changing our success shouldn't be because we helped one individual. We have to systemize this so we can help thousands of individuals. That's how many that need our help. In the past, too often, organizations would celebrate anecdotal stories of success. They'd parade that one person out there, and we changed John's life. Yay for us, give us money. But I'm not interested in just changing John's life. We have to be focused on changing thousands upon thousands of John's lives. To do that, we have to make sure that all the agencies and all the organizations out there that are working on homelessness really truly maximize their impact through the concept of collective impact. When we're all working together on the same strategies and the same goals, and we're really able to mesh our resources together and coordinate what we're doing, then we can raise that impact, unlike if we were all doing it individually alone. So, when we first started, everybody was doing their own thing, their own way, with their own strategies, their own goals. If I had a table with 5 agency directors around it, and I said, I got $10 million to help reduce homelessness, where should I invest it? I would probably get 5 different answers. And they would all probably say, if you just invest it in us, that's what's really missing, is whatever we do, if we just do more of it, that's the secret. So now what we say is show us the data. We want to see the data behind all of the interventions. And we're going to invest our limited resources where we're going to get the biggest bang for our return. They're the biggest return on our investment. And so if you're telling me we really need to do X, Y, and Z, great. Show me the proof that X, Y, and Z actually helps people get off the streets. Or does it make us feel good and we think it's doing, but we have no empirical data to show that. And so we bring together all these agencies. And we started with a 3-day community charrette with over 400 folks. And from that, we said we want to focus on getting folks off the streets. we came together, we formulated a plan to do that. And so if you want city funding, if you want county funding, if you want funding from the Houston Endowment, you have to be working together on this plan with those shared goals and shared strategies. Each one of these organizations is a very specific cog in our system. So if they walk into, for instance, a day shelter, the Beacon in downtown, the Beacon is celebrating when you go to their events that 900 people have walked through their front doors and they are now permanently housed. The Beacon didn't do that housing. Other agencies did. The Beacon served the important role, though, of being that front door to entice people to get off the streets, to come inside. We can learn who they are and what their needs are. Then there's other agencies like Search that step in and provide the housing navigation to get them housed, and other agencies that provide that housing, and other agencies that provide the supportive housing. And so, for instance, Search is one of our main organizations that provides case management to individuals who are housed. They also provide the outreach and housing navigation. And others do other aspects of that system. It's not perfect, but we're continuously monitoring it. But when I speak to other cities, the first thing I find is that it's disjointed. Everybody's doing their own thing. There's no coordination, and it really it's all about those agencies. It's about the board members saying we want to be coordinated. It's about the mayor and other elected officials saying it, and it's about the donors because through coordination, we get that impact.
So you talked about organizations, and it's really a chain of everyone on the same page partnering together. But off the chain, you have individuals. Individuals who might be driving around, see a homeless person, and obviously the first thing they want to do is reach into their wallet, give a dollar or two, or maybe a snack bag that they've put together, and they're distributing those. So if we were talking about the role individuals can play who are not necessarily affiliated with the groups you mentioned, Search, the Beacon, et cetera, what would you tell an individual? What's their role, and how can they help?
That's a great question. And, I think you're talking about a couple of different issues here. So often we equate panhandling with homelessness. And there's overlap there, but there are two separate issues. Some panhandlers are homeless. Some panhandlers are not homeless. And so when you give to somebody on the streets, you don't know where that money is going to. The person might not even be homeless. But at the end of the day, what people don't realize is we have teams and outreach teams that are out on a daily basis, coaxing people to get off the streets with food and supplies. If a person can get all their needs met on the streets, it's really difficult for our outreach teams to forge that needed relationship to get them off. At the end of the day, when I see folks that are on the streets asking for food or asking for money or whatever, my heart goes out to them, and I don't want to feel like a bad person by not giving them something. But what I've learned is that actually giving them something may not be helping and may be hurting at the end of the day. And instead, to direct your attention and your energy and your generosity to supporting one of the 100 organizations who are working tirelessly to get people off the streets. I have never heard of spare change and bologna sandwiches ever housing a homeless individual. But what I've heard is that people supporting those agencies that need it, volunteering with those agencies, that is what gets people off the streets.
And in line with that, for those who are familiar with the Search Mitzvah project that happens at Emanu, they actually include a resource sheet to kind of direct people to some of those resources that are available. But moving forward, I'd be remiss if I did not talk about the pandemic. You wanted to talk sports, so let's use a sports analogy. Dealing with the pandemic, I think all bets were off. Was there a playbook in place prior to the pandemic to potentially address what ended up being a situation similar to the one we're currently in? I guess whether there was or not, what initial actions happened in your world at the onset of this pandemic to deal with this, the people in our community who are dealing with homelessness?
So there's no playbook in place. And I can tell you, I never even heard of a quarantine isolation facility before I started to have to stand one up and operate one myself. And it really caught us off guard. And while the city has plans by and large for for health issues and pandemics, but targeted towards the most vulnerable communities, such as the homeless community, where most of the individuals have pre-existing chronic conditions. And most of them are either living in high-density congregate facilities, sleeping literally on top of each other, or they're sleeping on the streets without lack to proper hygiene. And so because of all those reasons, our homeless are one of our most vulnerable populations. You know, we started doing the small stuff. That was putting hand washing stations out, distributing over 10,000 bottles of hand sanitizer, distributing face masks and other PPEs to not only those on the streets, but to also our agencies. Then we worked on creating a homeless testing program. You know, the homeless can't just drive up to Del Mar Stadium and get tested. So how do we do that? Well, we worked with Healthcare for the Homeless Houston. We worked with all of our different partners in the Coalition for the Homeless to really devise a way and a system for the homeless to get easy access to testing resources. We have created a COVID prevention program that goes out and cleans the homeless locations out on a regular basis. But then we really worked on, you know, what can we do to get the homeless off the streets? A pandemic, it's times like these in crisis where you're thankful we don't have the population we used to have. You know, it might feel bad right now because we're seeing some homeless in places we've never seen before. But the reality is, in 2011, we had over 8,500 homeless individuals in the Houston area. We're the 8th largest homeless population in the country. Today, that number's been cut by over half. And the reason is because we focus not on managing, but solving the issue. It's during crisis, we are thankful that we don't have those 8,500 individuals on the streets. That would really stretch our ability to respond. And so today it's manageable. We're around 3,800 homeless individuals. A majority of them are actually in our shelters and not on the streets. And so what can we do? The mayor, working with the county, you know, the county and the city don't always work together on this issue. All 17 voting members of the city and all 5 voting members of the county voted unanimously provide $65 million of federal funding, an initiative to house 5,000 homeless individuals, as well as individuals who will become homeless because of the pandemic. It's actually cheaper for us to permanently house an individual than even pay for 3 or 4 months of a hotel stay. So during Harvey, we found out that housing is a response to crisis. And during a pandemic, housing is healthcare. And so how do we keep the homeless from using the emergency rooms for their normal medical care? We house them. What we have found is that by housing, it costs more to walk by a homeless individual than it is to pay for them to be permanently housed with wraparound services. In fact, an individual on the streets is costing Houstonians up to $40,000 in public resources a year. That cost can be cut by up to 70% by placing into housing. So we're going to be housing 5,000 individuals. The city and the county just put in $5 million each to creating a homeless mental health COVID response center. And additionally, we're working on increasing outreach. But at the end of the day, when I speak to our partners in LA, to New York, the city of Houston is leading the effort on this. And hopefully not only going to be responding to homelessness during this crisis, it'll pay off long-term dividends to reduce our population to record lows.
You know, and I've said this to you before talking to you and learning from you, these are things that I really didn't know. I didn't know that Houston in the last decade has really been the model for homelessness, and that there's so many people who were living in homelessness who are now in housing, and how such a big deal that is. So again, I appreciate learning from you. The next question I have is, you mentioned a lot of the initial steps and the partnership between the county and city, which is fantastic news. But what remain some of the biggest challenges for those on the front lines? As you know, I hate to say it, we're still in pandemic mode. So what are some of those biggest challenges that are hurdles that still remain?
Well, a lot has to come down to federal funding. And it's really imperative for Congress to figure it out, that the next installment. And, you know, it's really important to get that federal support as well as that state support. We don't know how long COVID's going to last. You know, initially we thought it'd be a couple months. Now we thought it would, you know, a vaccine would come, you know, at the very beginning of November. Now we're being told it's going to be mid of next year. So we need to prepare for the long run, and we really need to work on us, being strong and resilient, not just for another pandemic, but any other crisis like a hurricane that comes down the road. We've housed more than 18,000 homeless individuals since 2012. 90% of them were still housed 2 years after their initial placement. We used to be celebrating when it was 40%. One of the ways we've done this, though, is a strategy called Housing First. In the olden days, if you were to offer housing to a homeless person, you would have to say, well, you got to go to these classes every day. You got to stop smoking. You got to stop this. You got to do this. So you had all these rules. Most folks couldn't handle it. And even if they got housed, they went back on the streets, or they wouldn't take the housing. So we do really low barrier to get them housed. And once they're housed, we offer them these wraparound services. We found when it's up to the person's decision to accept those services, over 90% take them. And that housing with the supportive services was what keeps them housed. I think at the end of the day, we really got to work on finding these, creating locations where folks can stay temporarily while they're being housed. A consistent location where case managers and our housing navigators can find them on a consistent basis to work with them to getting them to that housing unit. And having those housing units is really important. The last thing is sustainability. It takes sustainable funding at the end of the day to reduce homelessness. If we house a chronically homeless individual who's incapable of working and unable to work, if we don't have the housing down the road, that means when their lease ends, they go back on the streets. Well, that's not what we want to do. So you have to have sustainable housing, and you have to have the resources every single year, because every day people are falling into homelessness in Houston. A lot of people will self-resolve themselves and get off the street themselves. Others will not. And we have to have that consistent funding stream. I think the mayor talks about all the time. The city puts in $0 of its own general funds into homelessness, the least amount of any city in the nation. And that's why we need sustainable funding in the long run, so that we can continue reducing homelessness, be resilient for any storm or crisis down the road.
All right, a few final questions. Most weeks I feel the need to ask our guests what they've learned during the current pandemic that's going to stick. I don't think this is any different. Are there things that you have learned, or perhaps colleagues across the country have learned during the pandemic that you think will stick and aid your work in the long term?
I really think, I work closely with Bloomberg partners, and I work with a bunch of other cities through them. But I think COVID has shown the importance of working together with other cities. When it hit, we didn't have the guidance to give to partners. We didn't even have a plan. And the first thing we did was talk to our sister cities that were experiencing in New York and San Francisco and Seattle. And we got their playbook. We got what their lessons learned. And that's how we formulated our own plan and was able to implement it. And that sharing between cities. We always talk about, we should share and work together. But the question is, are we really doing it in a meaningful way? And that was so important. The other aspect is housing is healthcare. An individual who is housed is one less person we have to respond to in a hurricane, one less person we have to respond to in a crisis. Their rates of infection rate is much, much, much lower. Their usage of an emergency room is next to nil. And these are people who are cycling in and out of the emergency rooms just for their basic needs beforehand. That when we can use housing as healthcare, that's when we can get the biggest response short term as well as long term. And the last thing is any crisis, you got to look for where there's the opportunity. And that's why we're using these COVID dollars to not just respond to this crisis, but actually have long-term impact at the end of the day.
All right, my next question might be a little personal. You and I are both fathers of young children. I have a 5-year-old who likes asking questions left and right. And he is really starting to pick up on individuals who are living on the street and really wanting to know, I guess, what's going on? Why are they homeless? And I think as a father, you probably understand this. What's advice you'd give the fellow fathers or parents in general about what we should tell our children when they ask these questions?
Well, I think at the end of the day, this is a very interesting question, because I grew up in a very small rural town, and individuals who are less fortunate, were my parents' friends, were our friends. We didn't have to seek out experiences to show and teach our children that there are individuals living in poverty or who may not be as fortunate as we are. But in the city, that's different, especially a city like Houston, where we want to admit it or not, we all live in our bubbles. And so while most people have heard of Acres Homes or heard of Sunnyside or Fifth Ward, how many people know where that's even located at? What are the boundaries for that? Are you friends with anybody there? And so, when I suggest individuals to do, the first thing is don't go on the streets. I know it's a very romantic notion that the person's on the street because I haven't helped them, I haven't talked to them, and I probably have what it takes. But the reality is folks on the streets, the number one reason is economic reasons. But lots of people are suffering from severe issues. And so that's why we leave it up to the professionals who are trained to do this in our outreach teams amidst all the different organizations. Support those organizations. Seek out meaningful, authentic volunteer opportunities. Too often I see people are posting videos on Facebook showing all their friends how good of a person they are by helping people. Or I see homeless makeovers posted on YouTube. At the end of the day, that person might have a haircut. They might be wearing better clothes and now have a sack full of McDonald's. But they're returning to the streets, and they're still homeless at the end of the day. So really, work at finding those organizations. You can go to thewayhomehouston.org. There's a list of all the 100 agencies that are working on these long-term solutions. Find out who they are. Find those meaningful opportunities to volunteer and to teach those lessons. And just don't do it once. Do it on a reoccurring basis. We are not tourists when it comes to poverty. And that's why we have to show that it's not about just a one-time thing to show and demonstrate. It's about demonstrating that they're part of the community and that we're dedicated to helping these individuals.
Well, I appreciate that. And for those who are watching, we'll include that link with our Facebook and YouTube videos, so you can find that link and click on it to take advantage of the resources. And my last question, Mark, I always like to end on a positive or something to take away. Is there some experience in your work with the homeless community here in Houston in the last few months that's really resonated with you? I think we all have these moments during the pandemic, we're like, aha, that was something that really stuck with me. Is there something that you have to share?
Well, at the end of the day, I think it's really interesting. A lot of our agencies, there's a lot of fear of the unknown of COVID, and we didn't know what to do. There were a handful of agencies that even in the height of the storm, they ran towards the crisis. And seeing those agencies coalesce, come together, and when there was much unknown, and putting themselves into harm's way to help these individuals really showed me what the Houston spirit is all about. And, I've seen it from each crisis I've responded to and from running all the emergency shelters during Harvey. But when folks come together and work together amidst all odds, that's the time where we find the biggest impact and the biggest effect that we can have on changing the lives of our most desperate and vulnerable brothers and sisters.
Wow. Well, I appreciate that. Thanks, Mark, for coming on today. It was really enlightening, and I hope those who watched were able to pick up something.
Thank you, Jason. I really appreciate the Congregation Emmanuel's focus on homelessness and all they've done for the issue and will do in the future.
Well, thank you, and thanks for coming on. Thanks to David Tanner behind the scenes. Our next broadcast for those who are watching is Wednesday, October 14th at 12 p.m. as we welcome Kelly Zuniga from the Holocaust Museum, where she is the CEO. We'll have an opportunity to learn how the museum pivoted online, how they were able to open during the pandemic. I believe they were one of the first museums in Houston to open during the pandemic, and what other exciting things are happening during this time. And of course, as a reminder, you can catch any episodes that you've missed of Conversations on the Emmanuel YouTube channel. And we'll see you again next Wednesday at noon. I hope you have a good week, and we'll talk to you then.